direction. You want to come at it at a 90-degree angle.
It's like a brake pad.
Yeah, because it hits the high spots and takes them out. Once you've done this pattern, then come this way. Then go this way, you know. So change your directions, because every time you switch that, you're cutting off high spots. Another thing is your speed makes a huge difference in polish. High pressure, slower speeds, cut. High speed and a light touch polishes. So I can take that 600, I can work it very coarsely with a lot of pressure, then go to a medium pressure, a little bit higher speed, high speed, and a light touch, and all of a sudden you'll see that 600 go from a 600 grit to like, wow, that's almost polished. I would not have thought 600 will do that. But it will do that.
It would make sense, because you're using less pressure and therefore less subsurface damage.
Yeah, and honestly, the larger the diameter of your wheel, the more speed you get, the more it polishes. Now, you can get to a point to where you can overheat or get too big too. So I usually go to max a 1-inch wheel. I do most of my finishing with, or my work and getting scratches out with this size wheel. And it just wears down. Okay, when I want to get a really high polish on something, I will use a, this is, I think it's, I want to say it's a 1/2-inch wheel. I'm not for sure what this is, but this is the size. So high speed, light touch with this diameter, because you get a lot of surface feed, and it will give you a shine like nobody's business. So quite often I'll have guys come to me like, Darryl, I used your stuff, I just can't seem to get a high finish like what you get. What are you doing? And I'm like, well, the difference is you haven't used a light touch, high speed. And you just work your surface back and forth again.
To preserve rounding, do you shortcut the bristles and make them shorter so that they're not as flexible?
Well, you can, but generally speaking, you've got that succession of wheels in what you're doing anyway. So, because if I start out doing the 600 with this, after I use it a bit, you shorten this.
Yeah.
So if it's not getting down into your grooves, you set it aside and you save it for later for a carving that your grooves aren't as deep for, or a surface that has more shallow grooves that you can work. So you're going to wind up with those set of wheels anyway. And if you got good, and this is the other thing too, you want to make sure you buy good bristle brushes, because cheap ones throw off fibers. And you'll know after you start using them, because you'll start seeing they don't last long. Your bristle brushes don't last long, or they'll start putting stuff all in the air all over.
Synthetic or natural?
This is synthetic. These are natural. I personally prefer natural. They're generally horsehair. Buffalo, yes.
Two different questions. About the bristle. So are you still using water?
No, not with diamond. You don't use water.
It's oil at that point, right?
No, it's all in here.
Oh, it's in the paste.
It's all in here. Yeah.
Okay, so second part question, because the whole diamond thing is like, that's its own zone, you know, and it sounds like you're pretty deep into it. So I hear about, is it monocrystalline and polycrystalline?
That's the structure of the gem.
Okay.
Well, there's like a polycrystalline diamond.
Oh, okay, of those types. Yeah, well, so there's a man-made diamond and there's a natural diamond. They do work differently. You know, and honestly, I can't tell you the difference. I wish I could, but I can't tell you the difference. I do know that there's an application for one or the other. Your own research, you just have to do your research on that. When we developed this particular paste, I worked with the company who makes diamond paste for a lot of the major companies. And they sell to other companies who then sell to you. This particular company, one of the things I told them is, I need a paste that's a 600, cuts like a 600, and when I'm through, leaves a finish almost like a 12. We went through probably, I bet 8 or 9 different formulas before we got this. But it does the job. I can't tell you whether it's, I could ask them what's in it and how they did it, but generally they don't want to tell you.
I just see a lot of commentary on the P or the M, you know, poly or mono, and it's way out of my league.
It's out of my league too, to be very honest. I don't have enough information. I haven't done enough research to figure that out, you know. But I do know that there is a difference. Generally speaking, the idea with the man-made diamond is they can get an even crystal structure that is consistent, and When they plate and they do that, you don't have the very sharp and the very, more inconsistency that you get with natural diamond. So when they're doing the lab-grown diamond stuff, that's the reasons for it, is a more controlled cut. And generally, in some cases, a sharper cut. Now, I think raw diamond or natural diamond cuts coarser than the lab diamonds, personally. But I don't know that that's truly the case. That's just how I feel about it from the use. But there is a purpose to that. And so I would just say you're going to have to do some research on that. And maybe Justin knows. Do you? Okay.
So John Rolfe, Gear Loose is going to be presenting
He
later
could tell
today,
you,
and he
probably.
can definitely speak to
Yeah,
that.
he could definitely tell you.
What about mixing diamond paste with like Vaseline? Have you found something like that to work? Not paste, diamond powder.
Oh yeah, you can make your own, and there's a lot of guys. There's tons of formulas for that. I even experimented with that for a while. You can. There's just depending on what you want to do. If you're doing a lot of let's say you're doing sculptural pieces, it's hard to buy pre-made stuff because it's expensive. So you're going to want to make your own. If you're doing large gemstone sculptures, because the cost comes down considerably when you make your own. So there are people who use Vaseline. The downside of Vaseline is very difficult to clean up. It's hard to see what you've got when you're through, okay? One of the things that sounds weird is KY jelly. Because, I know, it's a lubricant, it's water-based, which is what I prefer to use. Very, very few of my products that I personally use are oil-based. They're almost all water-based. And the reason is clean up. I can put this in the ultrasonic and it just comes right off. Or I could take a rag to it, and even I could put it in my dish and rinse it, and it comes off. Oil does not do that. Oil holds, but it's just a lot harder to clean up.
Yeah,
So
with that being said, I like using oil, and I agree it's harder to clean up, but I think it gives me greater process control.
it holds
So it's a
longer.
trade-off on what you want.
Yeah, it's a trade-off. It holds longer than the water-based does, but I just prefer the water-based.
Yeah, and we all develop our own technique.
Yeah.
So
You
just play
can
around.
use, I know when I was experimenting with trying to make my own paste, the glycerin, and I use glycerin, a combination of glycerin, coconut oil, and I use coconut oil because I don't like to use any oils that are harsh or dangerous to you. So I use glycerin and coconut oil together to create my particular paste that I was using and playing around with.
You
So.
crank the Hawaiian music.
Yeah, but you've got to figure that formula out. You've got to experiment. You've got to play with that. It's a matter of how much of one or the other, and it's a matter of how much diamond you add into it, and what consistency you like and what you prefer to use. Too thin, it just blows off. Too heavy, it just smears. So there's this fine kind of consistency that you got to get. I know in a little beeswax even in it will help. So experiment, play around, and if you develop something that works great, you let me know and maybe we can market it. So those are some of the points. Trying to think of other things that you guys might want to use. We sell these diamond centered wheels that are cutters, slitters. They work great for carving. They last a long time. They're like a separating disc, and they come in different widths and thicknesses and sizes.
And this would be used for what was going along the side of the trench.
Yeah. So let's say you did. Let's say you did a carving and you want to create a line or a ledge around the bottom to set. Let's say you're going to do a pendant out of that stone. You want to be able to run a wire around the edge. This is a perfect way of doing that because as you run it, it runs straight, it runs true, it cuts quick, and you can control what you're doing.
What's the thickest one of these?
I don't know. You just have to look on the site. We carry like 3 or 4 different thicknesses of those. And there's others out there, not just these. We have some others that work really well too. So there's a number of different things, and unfortunately, you're going to spend a little money experimenting to find what you like and what works great for you. We can suggest to you what, if you call Cutting Edge, we can give you some direction. And if you ask carvers, most of them will be willing to give you their information on how they approach something. I'm a firm believer in sharing, and that's why I'm doing this, because when I started in business, nobody wanted to tell me anything. It was like this competition thing, and you're not going to get my secrets. There's no secrets to be had here as far as I'm concerned.
On your V-shaped wheel, you were talking about dressing it up to maintain that nice fine knife edge. Can you dress it up with an old lap?
Yes, you can.
All right, because the reason I ask is that I talked to Ultratech, they developed a little holder that I can put in my faceting machine, and I can attach, now these things are removable, so I can now attach this to the shaft.
Correct.
And set the angle for exactly what I want my angle to be on my V groove. And it's very easy, very consistent, very smooth. I mean, it's machine manufactured at that point. So that's what I had designed that thing for. I've just never used it yet. And
well, that was why I mentioned, when you have a bird like this V shape, which I keep them all, don't throw them away. If your leading edge is wore out, save it, because all of this is still full of diamond, because you don't use this face. All you're using is really, maybe a quarter of the way up. Your underneath side is full of diamond. Use this to redress your wheels.
If I have a 600 grit center, should I dress that with a 280 or a 1200? Which way should
If it's
I?
a 6, I would say if you can, use the finest grit first.
Okay.
And the reason why is you don't want to introduce anything too.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah,
So if I'm dressing up the 600 center, I want to do it with a 1200 lap.
And then wash it. Wash whenever you're through dressing these, whatever the center wheels, wash them, because you will be surprised what it picks up, even though you don't think it does. Any of this stuff, any of your tools, if you're going from one grit to another for whatever purpose, wash in between. So every step, when you're using these rubber wheels, don't go from this blue coarse to this white finer grit and not rinse it or wash in between, because you're introducing something into this, or you're scratching your stone, you're picking something else up. So again, being clean with your work is critical. I keep a toothbrush an old toothbrush at my jeweler's bench, not to brush my teeth, but to to scrub my stones with. So if
Use
you
a different toothbrush for each grit, or you go get
no,
that angle?
no, I don't use a toothbrush, a different one for each grip, because I have an ultrasonic cleaner. And so I just rinse it in the ultrasonic cleaner, wash it, rinse it in water, and you're good. You don't have to worry too much about that. But if you were just rinsing, say, in a bowl, then I would say keep a toothbrush for each one, because you don't want to transfer it. Because once you transfer, it's a nightmare to get it clean again. If you can get it clean. Same as a faceting lap. You got a 1200 lap and you introduce 600 to it somehow, you'll play heck getting that thing to ever cut clean again. Some laps you can wash and scrub and you're fine, but some of those that are that hold more, that are a little more porous, you're pretty much done. You might as well just use it for a 600. So, any other questions you guys have on
Where are you at here at the show?
Pueblo Gym Show?
Okay.
So I'm at the tent and back, booth 5 and 6. Any of you guys who want to stop by, we have flyers and if you're interested, flyers for cutting edge. We do have an app for cutting edge supply. We carry a lot of tools from, pretty much all the major manufacturers. Some tools that we design and manufacture ourselves that aren't available anywhere, like the sanding disc and some other things. We have a torch holder that I designed and manufactured for years that I sell exclusively on that site. Rio Grande had it for, probably 10 years. Same with the Dremel tool hanger that I designed and manufactured. So I've invented a number of tools and products myself that we carry.
And to get to your booth, if you go through the entrance with John Dyer, you're
You
in
take
that
a sharp
left corner.
Take a sharp right, and
Or right.
take a right. You walk in,
Unless we got
you pass John, you're in the aisle.
Yeah.
I'm on the right. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Darryl,
All right, so,
Oh.
okay, my bad.
go ahead.
Wait, what is the Dremel tool that you invented?
It's not, it's a torch holder and it's a hanger for the Dremel tools. When I started in this business, there wasn't a torch holder. There wasn't a Dremel tool hanger. I started out as a jeweler, so I invented a torch holder that worked for the little Smith torch. And I introduced it to the Smith company. They didn't want it because they said they were working on their own at the time. And so I took it to other companies and they bought it. And in fact, Rio Grande bought exclusive rights to it for 3 years. And then after the 3 years, I sold it to other companies. Then I pulled it off the market for a number of years because I just didn't have time to fool with it at the time. And same with the Dremel tool hanger. But the hanger mounts to the side of your bench because all the others mounted on top of your bench and took up workspace. This mounts to the side of your bench, angles back over, has a swivel head that you can use to move it in and out of your workspace or lock it in position.
And what's it called?
I don't have a name for it. I don't have a name for either or. There's just a hanger and a torch holder.
So do you have a patent for them, or?
I did copyrights on them. I didn't do a patent because at the time I was poor and broke and I just needed to get the products out there and make what I could. And I figured I'd make as much as I could, and if somebody stole it, oh well, I'd move on to something else. But fortunately, no one has. But they're both available.
Well, that's cool. You can document everything, right?
Yeah. But I've got a lot of tools I've invented. I've got a jeweler's bench that I invented. I've got a sliding tool rack that sits on the side of your bench that moves in and out of your space. Soldering systems. I've got all kinds of stuff that I've invented. But some of them are available on the market, and some are just for my personal use. But that's the whole thing about this. It's about being creative. It's about being inventive.
Do you have a YouTube channel?
No, I do not. But we are working currently on doing some tutorials, which there are some on cutting edge supply, on carving, on faceting, things like that. We've got some people we're going to be working with. They're going to start doing videos that we're going to post. We're going to start doing actually some teaching classes that you can purchase through Cutting Edge. So there's some things in the works that we're in the process of. Cutting Edge started about 1.5 years ago, and it just no. That's not it though. It's called Cutting Edge Tool Supply.
And there's an app as well, and it's a well done app.
Yeah,
You can
there's
find
an
it on
app
the
also.
Store.
But I'll share it with you all after. But there's not just trying to plug me, but there's other companies. There's a lot of products out there that are great products. You just have to do some research and figure out what it is that you're looking to do. We're getting ready to introduce a carving system that a gentleman makes that has sold them for years. He does an incredible job on these carving tools for like doing reverse intaglio type work and stuff like that. Ultratech makes a fabulous machine. One of the best cutters, faceting machines on the market. But it's different. I also use a Raytech, the little one you pick up and use. I am a huge fan of that particular machine, but it's a meat point. You've got to be able to eye your stuff and look at it, and I think Justin sells something similar to it. And the reason for me is it's a freedom that I don't have in the other machine. And I think Justin can attest to that. Because when I'm freehanding, especially doing this type of work, in that you're locked in doing this. Where the other, I can pick it up, I can look at it, and I don't even have to take it out of the handpiece if I want to do work on it. I can work on the stone even in the handpiece. Or I can take, which is what this is, I can take it out, totally do whatever I want, drop it back in, and I'm gone. I'm off to the races again. Where the other, it's so precise and so technical. You gotta be a little more careful with what you do. Let's put it that way. It works great. We have what they call a fantasy cutting machine. I own both. I own the Ultratech faceting machine and I own the fantasy cutting machine. I think I've used the fantasy cutting machine twice in my life, and I've had it for probably 8 years. Which that's not good. But the reason why is because I'm self-taught and I can do what most guys takes them hours to do on the fantasy cutting machine. I can do in half the time by hand. Now, is it as precise? Definitely not. But I've got good enough to look at it. Most people would never know the difference between one cut on a fantasy machine and mine. But that's just practice, My son Nick is the same way now. He doesn't need the fantasy cutting machine. Does it have its purpose? Yes, it has its purpose, and it can do wonderful things. I know guys who do some incredible work on it. But for me, I've used it, I've tried it, and I just keep going back to what's comfortable to me, and that's just hand. Because I can lay out, so if I want a distinct pattern, I lay in a facet junction where I want my V to be. And I can lay that out and say, okay, if I cut to the borders of that V, I'm right there, and it lines up because I've laid in all of that in my faceting. Or if I want to do a pattern, I can lay out that pattern on my facets, whether I use a Sharpie, because you've got this facet here, I know I split that facet in half. When I come down here, I'm at the V of that facet. So when I carve it, I know I'm dead on because the facets already give me a guide or a layout.
Where's
Yes.
cutting edge supply and headquarters?
They're based in Cave Creek in Phoenix, Arizona. So it started out a year and a half ago out of my son's home, and it went from that to one warehouse to now 3 warehouses and 5 employees in a year and a half. So we were rated one of the top startup businesses. We now have grown tremendously. Now we carry beads, we're carrying jewelry tools, we're carrying lapidary. Our focus is still lapidary. That is what the company is based off. It's mainly internet. It's very little. I mean, we have the retail just because we have the space. That was not the intention, but it's internet-based business, and so our focus is lapidary.
Darryl, couple questions for you. The first is, do you find any use for those rubber radial disc or bristle discs? You know, where they've got
We carry those as well. Yeah, they have a great application. Some people find they work on stone. I haven't found that they work real great for stone, so we're trying to develop one that will do that. But for jewelry work, they're fantastic. They do a fabulous job on jewelry work.
And then I've been fascinated by your emerald cut stones, right? Where one half of it's carved.
Transition cut stones, yes.
Yeah. So in that case, are you actually faceting the whole stone and then carving, or are you doing just like you mentioned, where you're
So
preforming
that is
first?
what this is. So if you guys want to take a look at it, this is one I've started. It is, so there's 2 different approaches, and this is the secret that I shouldn't give away. It took me a while to play with that concept because it was an idea that I had where everybody who loved my carving said, I love them, but my jeweler can't do anything with them because this isn't in his wheelhouse, So the thought was then, how do I combine that love of carving with faceting? And so then it morphed into this idea, well, I'll carve part of the stone, they get a traditional cut that they can still order a setting for, but create something unique and different for them to be able to have. When I'm doing really high-end custom pieces, I start out faceting, I do my carving, then I finish the facets. That's the best way to do it. The quick version is to have a faceted stone, and like this particular one that I brought, and carve it. Problem is, you've got to be really, really good, because you slip, it's done. You can't fix it. There's no fixing, because now you've got to go back and try and find facet junctions. And those guys who facet who are really good could do it. They can dop it back up. You can find your facets and redo them. But the problem you have is, if you bought a stone, most times they're not precise. So trying to realign those facets is just a bear. And then you usually have to recut the whole table. Because once you start playing with one facet, now you've thrown the other off. So that's the reason you want to lay your facets in first, do your carving, and then finish. That's the reason. That's the best approach. Now, I have been doing this long enough that I can cheat. And I can take a faceted stone, a well-cut faceted stone, and do my transition cuts to them. It saves me a lot of time and headache. But, whenever I'm creating a new look or a new design, it's always do your facets, stop at about a 600, lay your carving in, finish your carving, and then finish your facets. Because what happens is, if you don't do that, all your facet junctions where your carving meets get rounded off, or they don't look clean, they look sloppy, because you've rolled off your edges. I figured out a few techniques that I can take a faceted stone and I can do the carving and still get in and create my detail and still clean it up and not have to go back and do it. But there are those occasions I slip, and then I go, okay, now what am I going to do with this? That's part of the creative part of faceting too. Then learning how to cover up or fix your mistakes. You know, I think any good faceter knows that and has played with that, where you're faceting and all of a sudden it chips or something goes awry and you slip for some reason, or you're not paying attention and you lay it down too hard, or you're doing this and you go off the edge, and all of a sudden you're like, you know, what am I going to do with this? You know, so then it's a matter of, okay, I've chipped the edge of this stone. It's not going to look like what I envisioned to begin with. What do I do to fix it? Now it turns into a fantasy cut. You do a couple scallops in the side, you polish them, and all of a sudden that stone is a new cut.
As long as you make your mistakes symmetrical, you can get away with anything.
That's right. And you don't have to tell anybody. It's not their business, because, you know, some of the best ideas came from mistakes that I've got, you know.
Sometimes it's a selling point. Yeah, I made this mistake. I did 5 other facets.
I don't-
There's a side and I'll just like it. And it worked out
Yeah, but if
well.
you're creating a line of something, you don't want to tell them that. But you know,
Different market
but in the
in my
case
case.
if it's a one-off, yeah, and I don't hesitate. You'll see a video that I have on my Instagram where I was working on a stone, and that exact same thing happened. I had a stone that I was cutting for Spectrum competition. Done, finished. I called the gentleman and said, this stone, it was a sunstone, it turned out absolutely fabulous. This is your weight, sending pictures. I was walking in to show my wife, and I opened the door and it hit my hand and it hit the concrete. And you heard the glass. You heard the glass, and I was like, you gotta be kidding, because this is a $60,000 stone. What do you tell this man that you just broke his stone because you decided to go show it to your wife? You know? So I called him and I said, hey, by the way, you know, your stone doesn't quite look the same anymore. And believe it or not, reworking that stone wound up winning me the competition. It just, you know, it's just all in how you approach it. You can either cry over it and put it aside, or you can be creative. And there are times, I will tell you, I've probably got 10 or 15 stones sitting around my shop that I cannot figure out what I'm going to do with, because I had a vision for it, and that vision is now not the same because it did something, or I did something. And my son will come around and he'll go, hey, Pops, are you through with that? And I'm like, it's been sitting here for a year or two. And he'll take it and he'll do something with it. And I'm like, I want my stone back now. You know? Because his vision wasn't my vision, you know? And there are other times it will sit there for a year or less, and I go back to it, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, now I know exactly what to do with this. So it's just a matter of playing, guys, you know?
I have a terminology question. Fantasy cut. To me, fantasy is anything with a concave V-groove or optical dish or dimple. But I sense your definition is a little different. What do you mean when you say fantasy?
Okay, so to me, fantasy cutting is anything other than a traditional shape. That's just my term of it. I don't know that there's a technical term or not, okay? Most people will consider fantasy cutting V-grooves, bubbles, any kind of negative cutting, concave, what have you. If you cut a shape that's just a funky, cool shape because you're trying to save weight on that particular piece of rock, to me that's a fantasy cut, because it's not fitting the norm. That's just how I see it. I'm sure that some people will disagree with that. Some people may go, okay. That's just how I view it. Fantasy cutting to me doesn't mean that you've got to do this carving work to it. There are guys who do what I consider fantasy cutting and standard faceting that are just absolute insane stuff that I just can't even wrap my head around. You know, Justin does some incredible stuff. You have, and I'm space his name right. He's a Russian gentleman. Victor. Victor does some stupid stuff. You know, there are guys like that. Another gentleman, Steve Utowski, Steve, who passed away. Yes, he was an incredible faceter who could do some incredible stuff. So to me, it's just a matter of what you're looking at doing for faceting that's out of the norm. That's what I consider personally fantasy cutting. Whether it's frosting facets, whether it's creating scallops on the side of a stone, whether it's creating V shapes or concaves or anything that anybody would pick up and say, this would never fit in a jewelry store, to me that's fantasy cutting. You know, that's just my concept of it.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Do you ever do pave stones?
Yes.
And do you have to have like, can you do it on a flat setting surface?
You can pave any surface. If you're talking about pave, where you're talking in metalwork, where you're
No.
bead setting,
No, I'm talking about like crystals or diamonds or a whole bunch of just gems that you can just pave, like cover like maybe a ring.
yeah. So you can pave bead set, you know, any pretty much any surface.
What do you
That,
use,
but
like
that's a jewelry technique. That's
Is it
not
a-
a stone technique.
Is it a glue that you use or?
No. That's metalwork. That's so you're creating seats and then using
Okay.
prongs to set it.
Okay.
You know, that's a pave.
Really? So that's each one gets from?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, that's a pave. And there's a pattern to that. There's a mathematical layout that you got to work with.
What about if you do the 3D printing? And can you put seats in a 3D print?
Sure you can. Yeah. Most true paveers would hate you.
But that's the new thing, right?
Well, it is a new thing. There's applications for that, but that's a whole different. That's a whole jewelry side of things, not a stone side of things.
Okay.
You know, if we're talking stones, then invisible setting. If you want to do an invisible setting, there's ways of approaching that are strictly stone. The really well done, the top end that I've ever seen in an invisible setting is just like a flooring. It's tongue and groove. It's not the cutting channels in the side of a stone and then using metal to set it. It's tongue and groove. You can do that. It's difficult, but it can be done. There's all kinds of techniques with stone setting. Let's say I drilled a hole in a stone and I wanted another stone to set into it. There's a way of doing that if you do it correctly. That if you get the right grit and you get the right fit, when you put that stone in place, it won't come back out because of the grit being tight enough that it creates almost a friction fit. It's tricky, it's touchy, it's hard to do, very, very hard to do, but it can be done. If you've ever, would be something I can explain to you. If you've ever taken a piece of metal and you start to push it into another piece of metal, and you got it in this tight enough fit, you can't get it back out if you've done it right. Because as you start to wedge it, if you use a lubricant of some sort, like water, and you push that bezel into another, you get a tight enough fit, you can't get it to come back out once that water's gone. You're going to have to cut it out or punch it out. Same with stone. If you do it right, you can get a tight enough fit. It's really difficult, but you could do it. There's all kinds of things. Warming something up, because you get expansion and contraction. If you wanted to fit something tight enough, and you warmed it up, and you put two together, and you let it cool, all of a sudden that thing is not going to come out. Metal works the same way, you know. So there's techniques, and that's the whole thing about experimenting with this. I mean, I want you guys to be, if nothing else, to come away from this, that you experiment. Don't be afraid to play. I made my son for the first year do nothing but experiment. I wouldn't let him just do what I do, because to me, my whole thing is there's time for that. There's time for you to make money at doing what you're going to do as your craft. There is a time period that's a finite period for most people before you really start needing to make a living, that you learn, that you experiment. And that's precious, because then that's where you develop your voice. That's where you develop something that nobody else is doing. Because you got the time and the liberty, and you don't have these preconceived ideas. For me, that's why I do a lot of the things that I do. My selling of gemstones has nothing to do with money. at the moment. It didn't early. It does kind of to a degree now because it's what I use to pay my bills. But it started out as an outlet for my madness. That's why I started doing shows. I had so much stuff sitting in my shop that it was like, what am I going to do with all this? And my wife was saying the same thing. You need to sell something. If you're going to keep buying rocks and cutting stuff, you need to sell something. You know?
I've heard that.
So it was an outlet for my madness. And to me, that's what I wanted my son to experience, the joy and the love of doing this, not money. The money is not going to keep you in this. You know, because that comes and goes. With anything in life, it comes and goes. You got to find a passion in what you love, and then that will always drive you. At least for me, and that's what I believe. You know, when people buy my work, I tell people, you're not buying a stone. You're buying a piece of me. You're buying the moment that I had this idea or this concept or this feeling or this emotion, or I had a lot of stress in my life, so I produced a lot of work. And when things are good, I slow down. That's just an honest fact. You know, when I've got stress in my life, this is my outlet for my emotions. And I've created some of my best pieces when my life sucked. That's sad to say, and I think that's true with even musicians or painters, or, you know, you see it in their work. You can either see the anguish, or you can see the joy, or you can see whatever it is. You can see it in their work because that's what drives them. That's what moves them. When things are good in people's lives, they tend to slow down a little bit, you know. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm glad to be where I'm at. Things are good. But I don't produce like I did when things are stressful, you know, because that's just where you tend to really push and push, and your energy shows. I'm at a point now where I'm more relaxed, and it's a beautiful place to be, and it's a different expression of my work than when things were difficult, you know. And so I just think that really, if you experiment, you play around, you're not willing to, you're not scared to screw something up. That's where you learn more, and you develop things that you wouldn't have thought of before. When you're complacent, or you're following everybody else's ideas and stuff, you're never really going to grow. You have to find your voice. And I have a lot of respect for this new group of guys who are coming in. They're doing some incredible stuff. I came in, I'm kind of in this lost realm of cutters, because you had these guys that came before me who were just fabulous. You had the Michael Divers, you had the Steve Walters, you had the Glenn Lears, you had all of these guys who, Moonsteiner, all these guys who were just on the cusp of this, I say, greatness for cutting. They were just doing stuff the rest of us just hadn't even dreamed of. And then I came in behind these guys. I'm following them, but that heyday of money and movement kind of waned. And so then I had to try and find my own spot in this. And it took a long time because nobody wanted to teach or show me anything. And I always thought that was a real tragedy, even in jewelry. And I always swore I would never do that. So I try and share as much as I can possibly share, because unfortunately we get busy at a point too where you kind of go, I don't know how I'm gonna find time for all of this. But I've trained at least 6 different people. And I'm still willing to share whatever knowledge I have. But now we're seeing this nice resurgence of these young guys who are coming in and doing some really cool stuff, and I want to see that grow. I want to see that movement continue. And part of Cutting Edge is trying to create that community. We want a community of people who are willing to share that voice and that vision and not let it die with these guys, and not saying that they didn't share, but there is just this gap that kind of was where I fell into, that it wasn't a lot, and now we're starting to see it come back again. And so I really want that to grow, and you guys to be able to share it with your kids and their kids. And anytime I have someone young come to my booth, the first thing I do is I give them a rock. I don't care, I'll give them a topaz, I'll give them a garnet, I keep stones at my booth for that purpose, because that's how I got started. I was going to shows and I had people who were like, you know what, son, pick a stone or two, and to me that was like, and to him it was probably nothing, but it meant the world to me, And then I had other gentlemen who was an older gentleman who did that for me. I had a teacher. I learned the basics in high school. I learned very basic jewelry and stone cutting in high school. And she spent her time after school taking me to introduce me to, you know, the stone suppliers and the gem cutters in the town that I was in. And to me, that was like, who does that? But, you know, look what it did. It's allowed me to have a career that I would not have had otherwise.
What town was
Topeka, Kansas. But my son, my kids grew up in Gilbert, and at the high school they went to, they taught jewelry and gem cutting. And so I donated hundreds and hundreds of gems to the class. I would go in and I'd talk to them. And, you know, I wanted them to be able to work with pearls and rubies and other stuff, you know. So I just had, they weren't expensive, but they were great stones for kids who would not have had that kind of stuff to be able to experiment and play with it in their classes. You know, that's important to me. So I think this community that we have, like these centers and places like that, they tend to be dying places because the younger kids just aren't exposed to it. They'd rather sit on a video game than to get out and do something. And to me, this kind of stuff is what drives your imagination and gets you out doing things, gets you out in nature, go rock hunting, go kick a rock, you know, go pick up a fossil, you know. And that's just something I think everybody, to some degree, should have the experience of doing. So I go mining. I do that kind of stuff. I dig up the rocks that I cut, you know, in a lot of cases. So, you know, I mine amethyst, sunstone, just in a range of jaspers and all kinds of stuff. So get them out, you know, talk to the kids about it. So, any other questions?
Yeah, I have one question. You know, there are so many different types of booths in the gem shows that I go to. I mean, I've been to like so many gem shows. I used to actually work at the Holiday Inn, and there was like a high security gem show at the basement level at the city center.
Mm-hmm.
And are there any places where you could say that to stay away from, that you're not really going to get a good deal, and there may be some shady people?
You're going to run into that no matter where you go. I don't care if you're in AGTA. I don't care if you're in, you know, some little backwoods place. You're always going to have somebody who's not as honest as they should be. That's just unfortunate, but it's just the facts. You just have to determine that for yourself. There are communities on Facebook and stuff like that that you can join, that everybody kind of shares that information. I'm never going to say one place is better than another. There are some places that are good to shop at, yes. And you know, I don't mind telling you those things, but I'm never going to tell you this guy's not good or that guy's not good, because who am I to say that? That's just my opinion. But I only learned that from experiences having been burned, because I prefer to give everybody the benefit of the doubt to don't have it anymore.
Well, thank you, Darryl. We appreciate your time. Definitely appreciate it. Great advice.
Hopefully that's helpful to you guys. You guys are welcome to look at the tools, the stuff I brought. You know, a lot of the stuff is, like I said, all that's available on our site.
That looks nice. All that
Cheryl,
stuff
what's
looks
your
awesome.
Instagram account?
Sunstone.da.
Okay.
And I